She lived in a crumbling cottage on the edge of a vast, untamed forest, nurturing a lone wolf pup, one that would grow beyond anyone's wildest imagination. No one foresaw how their bond would lead to a final, jaw-dropping act after her death, a moment that would defy nature's boundaries and forever change the town's whispered legends. On a secluded strip of land by the old pine forest, the name Agatha carried a certain mystique. She was an elderly woman, solitary by choice, her presence as much a part of the woods as the whispering trees themselves. The townsfolk spoke of her in hushed tones, weaving rumors of a reclusive existence sustained by a modest pension and the occasional kindness of wary neighbors. Her home, a weathered cottage with a leaning chimney, stood defiant against time, much like its owner. Many avoided the area, clinging to half-remembered superstitions about wild creatures lurking within the forest depths. But all of that changed one fateful winter, when a villager returned from a hunting trip with a tale that sent ripples through the town. He had seen Agatha walking through the snow with a small, scruffy wolf pup trailing behind her. Bright yellow eyes, sharp as candle flames, stared out from the pup's tiny frame, sending a shiver down the hunter's spine. A wolf, barely larger than a house cat, yet undeniably wild. How could a frail old woman take in such a creature? Was it pity, or had loneliness driven her to madness? Some predicted disaster. Others watched with guarded curiosity as Agatha persisted, raising the pup as if he were no different from a loyal hound. She named him Silver, for his sleek, silvery fur that shimmered beneath the moonlight. And Silver grew. Not in the way of ordinary creatures, but with a startling rapidity that left villagers stunned. By the time he reached adolescence, he was already larger than most dogs, bounding at Agatha's side whenever she ventured into town for supplies. Townsfolk murmured as they watched the towering wolf walk beside her, his keen gaze observing everything with an unsettling intelligence. Even the bravest dogs tucked their tails and slunk away in his presence. Yet for all the fear he inspired, Silver never bared his teeth in aggression, never lunged at a stranger. His devotion to Agatha was unwavering, his protective stance a silent warning to those who dared approach uninvited. Their bond became the stuff of legend, an old woman and a beast side by side against the world. Some whispered that she had tamed him with magic. Others believed it was something more profound, something that transcended the divide between human and wild. Then, one autumn, the inevitable happened. Agatha passed away in her sleep, her frail body finally succumbing to time's relentless march. A quiet, unremarkable death. But what came next would leave the village in stunned silence, shattering their deepest fears and prejudices. For Silver was no ordinary wolf, and his grief would be a force too great for words, too powerful to ignore. What he did next would shake the town to its core. Dr. Braxton watched with mounting concern as Silvera's once powerful form seemed to shrink under the relentless winter. Despite the town's division, the wolf's suffering was undeniable. As the days passed, the wind carried whispers of his impending fate. If left to his own grief, he would not last until spring. The resolution came in an unexpected form. One night, as the village slept under a canopy of icy stars, the church bell tolled, soft, singular chimes that rang eerily through the quiet town. It was Tobias who first spotted the figure standing motionless near the churchyard. Lily, bundled in a thick woolen cloak, her breath a pale mist against the cold, had gone to Silvera with a final plea. But this time, she had not come alone. Father Everett, moved by the wolf's devotion and Lily's unwavering kindness, had taken it upon himself to help. With steady hands, he laid a strip of Agatha's old shawl before Silvera. The familiar scent, woven with time and love, seemed to stir something deep within the creature. The wolf nudged it gently, then lifted his solemn gaze to the priest and Lily, as if seeking permission, seeking guidance. At that moment, the townspeople gathered at a cautious distance, watching with bated breath. Even those who had once feared him could not deny the quiet reverence of the scene before them. Dr. Braxton, Tobias, Lily's father, all stood in silence as Silvera, at long last, rose from the gravesite. His movements were slow, deliberate, his body weak, but his spirit unbroken. With one last lingering look at Agatha's resting place, he turned away.
The town held its breath as Silvera, their spectral guardian, took his first hesitant steps away from the grave. It was not exile nor defeat. It was something else entirely. A tribute, a promise, a testament to a love that transcended even death. The snow fell heavier that night, blanketing the world in silence. Some swore they saw the wolf pause at the edge of the cemetery, his massive frame silhouetted against the moonlight, before disappearing into the woods beyond. Others whispered that even in the dead of night, the faintest of howls could be heard, soft, wistful, and filled with something not quite sorrow, not quite longing, but something deeply, achingly human. By dawn, the cemetery lay still, untouched, as if the wolf's vigil had been but a dream. Yet, in the years that followed, villagers often found fresh paw prints in the snow near Agatha's grave, as if some unseen guardian still roamed the edges of their world, bound forever by a love that neither time nor death could sever. And so, the legend of Silvera was born, a tale of devotion that would be passed down through generations, whispered by candlelight, retold by fire's glow. A tale that reminded them all that love, in its truest form, never truly fades. It simply lingers just beyond the veil, waiting in the shadows of memory. As the windstorm raged through the village that night, Lily lay awake, heart pounding with a nameless fear. Each gust rattled her window, whispering ominous warnings through the trees. She imagined Sila at the graveyard, braced against the storm, fur whipping in the wind, refusing to leave Agatha's side. Unable to bear the thought, she threw on her coat and boots, slipping out of the house as quietly as possible. The streets were mostly deserted, villagers hunkered down indoors against the storm. Only a few lanterns flickered from porches, their light barely piercing the swirling debris. When Lily reached the cemetery, she found Sila exactly as she feared, hunched over Agatha's grave, his massive form barely moving against the onslaught of wind and cold. Snow had begun to collect in the hollows of his fur, his eyes barely visible beneath the frost. He was shivering. "Sila," she called softly, stepping closer, her voice barely carrying over the howling wind. The wolf turned his head slightly, his amber eyes weary, but his resolve unbroken. Lily felt tears sting her own eyes. "You have to come with me," she pleaded, kneeling beside him despite the cold seeping into her jeans. "Just for the night, just to get warm." Sila exhaled a slow, heavy breath, lowering his head. He didn't resist when Lily cautiously reached out to brush the ice from his fur. Encouraged, she continued, speaking in soothing tones. "Agatha wouldn't want you to suffer," she whispered. "Please, just for tonight." The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up sharply. Tobias, her father, and Dr. Braxton had arrived, their expressions torn between relief and worry. "Lily, we need to get him out of here," Tobias said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "If he stays much longer in this, he won't make it."
Dr. Braxton knelt beside her. "We can take him to my clinic for the night, just to warm up." Lily hesitated, knowing that if they moved him now, it might be the last time he'd ever return to Agatha's grave. She looked back at Sila, whose eyes, so full of sorrow and exhaustion, seemed to plead for understanding. A gust of wind made her decision for her. "Okay," she whispered. Carefully, they coaxed Sila to his feet. He resisted at first, but exhaustion and cold had drained him. With slow, deliberate steps, he allowed himself to be led away from the grave for the first time since Agatha's passing. The journey to the clinic was slow, but as they entered the warm, lantern-lit interior, Lily saw Sila's body sag slightly in relief. Dr. Braxton and Tobias worked quickly, drying him off, offering him warm broth. To everyone's quiet surprise, he accepted it. As he lay down on a thick blanket, finally resting, Lily knelt beside him, gently running her fingers through his fur. "We'll figure this out," she whispered. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, for the first time in weeks, Sila closed his eyes, no longer alone in his grief. Unrestrained was too risky, especially near a public resting place for the dead. Lily's father, growing suspicious of Gideon, spoke privately with Tobias and Mrs. Hawkins. "What if this so-called expert is just another profiteer looking to exploit Silver?" he warned, recalling the earlier rumors of unscrupulous individuals wanting rare animals for personal gain. Mrs. Hawkins, digging into Gideon's background, uncovered only a patchwork of references, occasional stints at small zoos, a handful of questionable blog articles about exotic animal handling, nothing solid, nothing reputable. "He's either a con man or a dangerously untrained meddler," she concluded, urging caution. Dana Clean, the wildlife agent, also took note of Gideon's arrival. When he attempted to meet with her, describing how he'd humanely relocate that overgrown wolf, she pressed him for permits and references. Flustered, Gideon sidestepped her questions. His refusal to provide verifiable credentials only deepened her mistrust. However, Corwin and his allies continued to defend Gideon's offer, pressuring Dana to let him take care of the problem. The wildlife agent, caught between official protocols and local demands, found her patience wearing thin. Each time she tried to finalize her report, new arguments burst forth, stalling any clear resolution. Meanwhile, Lily observed these swirling tensions with growing dismay. Each day, the wolf's gaunt frame and weary eyes reminded her that time was short. If Silver continued this starved vigil, his life would hang by a thread, regardless of Gideon's schemes or the outcome of Dana's report. In quiet moments, Lily whispered to the wolf about memories of Agatha, how the old woman had shown kindness to stray cats and even nursed a wounded fox back to health many winters ago. "She wouldn't want you to die here," Lily murmured, tears smudging her cheeks. Yet Silver only gazed past her, trapped in his sorrow. A new wave of fear rippled through the village when Corwin and a few followers marched to the cemetery one crisp morning, Gideon in tow. They carried nets, ropes, and tranquilizer darts, purchased online, rumor said, with the apparent intent to subdue the wolf by force. A small crowd gathered to watch from afar, uncertain whether to intervene or let events unfold. Lily's father, rushing to the scene upon hearing the commotion, found Lily already there, standing protectively between the men and Silver. Her heart hammered as she spread her arms wide. "Don't do this," she shouted, voice cracking, knowing that the slightest provocation might trigger violence from either the wolf or the fearful men. Gideon stepped forward, his posture stiff with self-importance. "Step aside, child," he demanded, "for this wolf is a danger and needs professional handling."
Lily's father quickly positioned himself beside his daughter, ignoring Gideon's glare. At that precarious moment, the wolf lifted its head, ears flattened, issuing a guttural growl. The sound was low, throbbing, a caution more than an attack. Corwin, spooked, raised a net, but Lily's father barked, "Stop, let Dana clean decide." Caught in a standoff, Gideon hesitated. Mrs. Hawkins appeared, camera ready, capturing the tense scene. Dana Clean, who had rushed over upon hearing of the confrontation, arrived with a scowl. Her stern voice cut the air. "No one acts without authority here." She turned to Gideon, her expression challenging. "Unless you have an official permit for wildlife capture, you're trespassing on the cemetery and endangering the community."
Flushed with embarrassment, Gideon tried to protest but was quickly drowned out by the townsfolk's murmurs. Realizing his plan to act unilaterally might fail under public scrutiny, Gideon lowered his gear, casting Corwin a frustrated glance. In that breath of respite, Lily crouched beside Silver again, tears of relief streaming. The wolf, though trembling with tension, didn't lash out. He simply closed his eyes as though exhausted by this perpetual siege. The crowd, once bristling with fear, now seemed transfixed by a scene of quiet heartbreak. Even Corwin's anger softened under the wolf's palpable despair, though pride prevented him from admitting it openly. So the confrontation ended in a draw. No forced removal, no settled future for Silver. Yet a fresh wave of anxiety hit the village. The escalation signaled that more attempts might follow unless a definitive solution emerged. In the aftermath, Dana took Lily's father aside. "I'm finalizing my report by tomorrow," she told him quietly. "It'll likely advise sedation and relocation. But if the public outcry is loud enough, or if the sanctuary approach fails..." She trailed off, leaving the grim alternative unspoken. That evening, Lily's father and Tobias, joined by a few sympathetic townsfolk, resumed night watch near the cemetery. Their presence deterred any further attempts by Gideon or Corwin. Still, the wolf grew visibly weaker, barely touching the food Lily offered. Each time she gazed into his eyes, she sensed a fading light, as though his spirit clung to Agatha's memory more than to his own survival. In that hush of the frosty moonlight, it became painfully clear that some climax was inevitable. The village had run out of half measures, and the wolf, poised between life and death, might force them all to witness an act that would forever reshape how they saw the bond between human and beast. A distant wildlife sanctuary that specialized in large canids offered a glimmer of hope. Mrs. Hawkins, wielding her network of contacts, reached an old colleague who confirmed that the sanctuary had space for one more wolf, if he could be safely transported. Eager to find a gentle resolution, Mrs. Hawkins relayed the news to Lily and her father. "They'll send a trained handler with proper sedation equipment," she explained. "No shady business, no profiteering like Gideon's suspect methods. It could be the best chance for Silver to recover from his grief in a protected environment."
Lily's eyes lit up, torn between relief and a nagging sadness. But what if he wants to stay here by Agatha? Would he hate us for taking him away? Her father laid a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes protecting someone means doing what they can't understand," he said softly, glancing at the wolf's stoic figure through the cottage window. "He's dying out there, Lily. We can't let him." News of a possible sanctuary offer spread quickly. Some townspeople welcomed it. "At last, a humane approach," they murmured. Others pointed out that forcibly moving a wild creature still felt akin to betrayal. Gideon scoffed at the notion, muttering darkly that he could do the job better and faster. Corwin's faction remained distrustful of any plan that didn't ensure the wolf's permanent absence. Nonetheless, a date was tentatively set for the sanctuary handler to arrive and assess the situation. So all the elements converged. A broken-hearted wolf clinging to its graveyard vigil, a village torn between fear and empathy, a legitimate sanctuary team on the horizon, and a self-appointed trapper seething over his thwarted ambitions. Tension spiraled, and with them, the fate of Silver hung in the balance. The village lay shrouded in a ghostly silence, the freshly fallen snow absorbing every sound. Even the wind, which had howled the night before, seemed to hold its breath. In the cemetery at the foot of Agatha's grave, Silver stood like a solemn guardian, his massive form dusted with white. But his stance, once strong and unwavering, had begun to waver. His grief had sapped his strength, and the days without food had taken their toll. A small gathering of villagers watched from the iron gates, divided in their emotions. Some had come to offer quiet support, leaving food and water within respectful reach. Others had gathered in protest, their fears fueled by the venomous words of Gideon Corwin, who had been relentless in his campaign to have the wolf removed, or worse. "It's only a matter of time before that monster attacks a child," Gideon declared, his voice sharp as the cold air. "I have proof that it's already bitten someone." A murmur of unease spread through the crowd, even though no such attack had occurred. The lie, once spoken, took on a life of its own, infecting the uncertain hearts of those gathered. Signs were lifted in defiance. "Remove the wolf now, and wild beasts don't belong here." Lily and her father stood at a distance, their faces drawn. They had fought for Silver, but the tide of fear was strong. When Ms. Hawkins, the ever-watchful journalist, stepped forward with her camera, the protesters fell silent, aware that their actions were being recorded. Ignoring the crowd, Lily moved forward, kneeling beside Silver, her hand reaching out cautiously. "Silver," she whispered. The wolf did not flinch. He merely exhaled a cloud of mist into the freezing air. Her father turned to the onlookers, his frustration evident. "Look at him. He's not a threat. He's mourning." Some of the protesters hesitated, the sight of the grieving wolf at odds with their fear. Even those who had been swayed by Gideon's rhetoric faltered, seeing Lily's gentle touch on the creature's fur. But Gideon was not done. "You're risking that girl's life," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger. "You're all blind." Lily lifted her tear-streaked face. "He's never hurt me," she said, her voice strong despite her sadness. "He's only hurting himself." Before Gideon could respond, Dana Klein, the wildlife agent, stepped forward. Her presence carried authority, her gaze calm yet firm. "I just spoke with the sanctuary," she announced. "Their transport team will arrive tomorrow. If the town consents, they will sedate the wolf humanely and relocate him to safety." A ripple of conversation passed through the crowd. Some exhaled in relief, glad for a peaceful resolution. Others, like Corwin, stiffened in defiance. "He belongs in the wild or not at all," Corwin snapped. "Put him down. That's the only way to be sure." A few of his supporters muttered agreement, but their voices lacked conviction. Miss Hawkins turned her camera on him, and Corwin hesitated, unwilling to be the face of cruelty in the eyes of history. That night, as darkness settled over the village, a small group of villagers gathered in the cemetery, forming a quiet vigil of their own. They lit a fire near the gates, not only to warm themselves, but to deter any trouble. Rumors had spread that Gideon might make a final attempt to remove the wolf himself, a reckless, selfish act born of wounded pride. Around the fire, people who had been strangers just days before sat together, sharing blankets and hot cocoa. They told stories of Agatha's kindness, of the time she had taken in wounded animals,
cared for the lost, and offered shelter to travelers caught in storms. As the night deepened, Lily sat close to her father, staring into the flames. If Silver goes to the sanctuary,
she said softly, do you think he'll ever forgive us for taking him away? Ms. Hawkins, listening nearby, offered a gentle smile. Animals have their own way of understanding, Lily. Sometimes the greatest kindness is saving them from their own sorrow, even if they don't see it at first. But not everyone shared that sentiment. In the shadows, Gideon seethed, his mind racing. If the sanctuary took the wolf, he would be proven wrong. He had one last chance to act. Dawn arrived in a blaze of pink and gold. The sanctuary van rolled into the village just before noon. Two handlers stepped out, their movements calm, their voices low as they conferred with Dana and Dr. Braxton. Lily and her father stood by as the plan was explained. Dr. Braxton held a syringe filled with a mild sedative. We'll try a gentle dose first, she said. If he accepts it calmly, we'll move forward. If not, we have a dart gun as a last resort. The idea of the dart unsettled Lily. That won't hurt him, will it? One of the handlers crouched beside her, offering a reassuring nod. We've done this before, Lily. We'll be careful. Together, they approached the grave. Silver lifted his head, his golden eyes dull with exhaustion. He did not move away as Lily knelt before him, offering a small piece of cooked meat. It's okay, Silver, she whispered. The wolf sniffed the offering, then let out a low whine. His body trembled. He was too weak to resist. Her father nodded to Dr. Braxton, who moved forward carefully, syringe hidden in her hand. Lily held her breath as the vet knelt, reaching out slowly. Would Silver accept their help? Or, in his final act of defiance, would he refuse to be saved? The villagers, the sanctuary team, the protesters, and the hidden figures waiting in the dark all held their breath, waiting for the moment that would decide Silver's fate. The villagers' resentments, though subdued, left an undercurrent of tension. Any misstep might reignite old fears. Lily's father, observing the town's shifting attitudes, realized the story was far from over for those who had come to care for Silver. Day after day, Lily pestered him for updates from Dr. Braxton, desperate for signs that the wolf was healing, not just physically, but emotionally. He also sensed his daughter struggling with tangled emotions. She had wanted to save Silver, but hated the thought of him languishing in captivity, far from the only home he had ever known. To ease her worries, he made a promise. If the sanctuary deemed it feasible, they would one day visit. Perhaps if conditions allowed, Silver might even be reintroduced to a protected forest. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hawkins continued penning the final chapters of her comprehensive article. She interviewed villagers, capturing their shifting perspectives now that Silver was gone. Some spoke of relief, others of a strange ache, as though the cemetery had lost a sacred presence. Tobias admitted he sometimes wandered near Agatha's grave out of habit, half expecting to see the wolf still there. A part of me misses him, the farmer confessed. Strange as it sounds, that monstrous silhouette at the grave had become comforting. Then, an unexpected discovery emerged from Agatha's personal effects. While sorting through the old woman's meager belongings, a distant cousin found a small journal. Its pages revealed glimpses of Agatha's life with Silver, how she had rescued him from a collapsed den after poachers killed his mother. The notes chronicled the pup's growth, his remarkable intelligence, and Agatha's quiet fears, that if she passed first, he would be left to drift, alone and misunderstood. The cousin, moved by these entries, shared them with Lily. She read each line with brimming eyes. "He was never truly wild," she murmured. "He was orphaned and loved by her from day one." Miss Hawkins wove these revelations into her article, transforming Silver's tale from a story of eerie loyalty to a poignant testament of devotion, a bond formed not by instinct, but by years of love and care. Dana Clean, the wildlife agent, finalized her report, admitting to Rowan, "I came here expecting to order a standard capture or euthanize scenario, but your community's reaction and that wolf's behavior showed me there's more to these stories than rules on paper. I'm changed by it." For Lily, the emotional peak came when Dr. Braxton delivered a surprising breakthrough. After weeks of solitude and howling, Silver had begun interacting with another rescued wolf, an older female with a missing ear, also from a traumatic background. Their cautious sniffing and tentative companionship hinted that Silver might find a new pack bond, slowly easing his grief over Agatha. During a small memorial service organized for Agatha, Lily placed a modest plaque at the cemetery, in loving memory of Agatha and her wolf, whose bond reminded us that love knows no bounds. As snow drifted around them, Tobias, Mrs. Hawkins, and a handful of villagers paid their and domesticated pets failed to capture the complexity of a bond like Agatha and Silver's. The main conflict had been resolved, but moral questions lingered. Could the wounds of heartbreak and captivity be healed by the sanctuary's gentle care? And for Lily, who had poured her heart into saving Silver, one unspoken vow formed. One day, she would see him again. Weeks passed, and life in the village resumed its quiet rhythm. But Lily's heart still yearned for closure. Sporadic updates from the sanctuary reported that Silver was physically healed, but emotionally distant. He rarely bonded with the other wolves, and his amber eyes often stared at the enclosure gate, as if waiting for an unspoken call to beckon him back. Then came the catalyst for the final resolution. Miss Hawkins, after weeks of editing, published her in-depth article. It spread beyond their small region, resonating with readers across the country. Letters and emails poured in from wildlife enthusiasts, empathetic souls, and those captivated by the notion of an animal harboring such deep devotion. Many wrote of how animals sometimes needed a final goodbye to move forward. Lily clutched onto that thought. Could Silver need one last moment at Agatha's grave to release his sorrow? Tentatively, she proposed a daring plan to her father. What if they brought Silver back, just once, under controlled conditions? Let him witness Agatha's resting place again, perhaps offering him the farewell he never truly had. Her father hesitated. The risks were obvious and the town's approval was uncertain. But Lily's conviction, bolstered by Miss Hawkins' article and the overwhelming public support, rekindled hope. Dr. Braxton cautiously agreed. If the sanctuary staff are willing and we ensure every safety precaution, it might help him emotionally. Even Dana Clean, skeptical at first, acknowledged that it aligned with a compassionate framework. The sanctuary's director, moved by Silver's story, agreed on one condition. The entire town had to coordinate security. If even a hint of chaos arose, the plan would be scrapped. To everyone's surprise, the village, once divided, rallied together. Corwin's faction, though reluctant, conceded that an organized, supervised event was safer than clandestine attempts to interfere. Tobias and Lily's father volunteered to help, ensuring the event remained peaceful. And so, on a brisk morning weeks later, a sanctuary transport van arrived once more in the village. Crowds gathered at a respectful distance. Lily, trembling with anticipation, watched as the handlers emerged with Silver. He was lightly sedated but still alert,
his massive frame bearing the same regal strength, though his eyes carried a haunted air. Under the careful watch of Doctor Braxton and Dana Clean, the group entered the cemetery. Snow glistened on the tombstones. Lily walked ahead, guiding Silver by a gentle leash. They moved with stiff caution, nostrils twitching at familiar scents. Then, as they neared Agatha's grave, a visible tremor rippled through his body. He stopped. The wolf's amber eyes locked onto the simple wooden cross. A low whine escaped him, a sound of longing, recognition, and grief. Slowly, he stepped forward and pressed his muzzle to the cross's base, letting out a sound, a lament, raw and unfiltered.
Lily felt a chill run through her. She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his thick coat. "It's okay," she whispered. "We brought you back so you'd know. She's at peace. You can be free now." Then came the astonishing resolution. Silver rose onto his haunches and tilted his head skyward. A piercing, mournful howl broke from his throat, reverberating through the silent graveyard. It sent a shiver through every onlooker. It was a cry of farewell, a release, a sound that seemed to acknowledge both his sorrow and his acceptance. And with that, the great wolf stood, shook out his thick fur, and turned toward Lily. In his amber gaze, something had shifted. The weight of longing seemed to ease. A final goodbye had been given. As the handlers gently guided Silver back to the transport van, Lily watched him go with tears brimming in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of peace. She had done right by him, by Agatha, by the bond that had defied the barriers of species and time. And as dusk settled over the cemetery, the wind carried the fading echo of Silver's farewell, a sound that would linger in the hearts of those who had witnessed it, forever changed by the wolf's enduring love. Reverence for a wild creature's devotion reminded them of virtues often lost in the rush of everyday life. No one forgot the piercing howl that reverberated through the cemetery that day, nor how Silvera, in his moment of profound mourning, seemed to find release. For Lily, the emotional journey left an indelible mark. Though she missed the wolf's presence and worried about his adjustment to life in the sanctuary, she carried a gentle peace in her heart. Every so often, an email or call from the sanctuary arrived with updates. Sila had begun exploring the larger enclosure, interacting with a small pack also rescued from dire circumstances. He no longer refused food or human proximity. A staff member even described how, under the soft moonlight, Silver would sometimes lift his muzzle in a subdued howl, not the raw lament that once shook the village, but a more natural wolfish call. "He's learning to be a wolf again," they explained. Lily, tears brimming, found solace in that. If he was healing, so was she. Agatha's humble plaque at the cemetery became a modest site of reflection. Villagers left small tokens of gratitude, a wildflower, a note about how her bond with Silver inspired them, or a simple carved trinket shaped like a wolf's paw. The caretaker, once uneasy about a predator haunting the grounds, now kept the plaque tidy, glancing at it each morning with a thoughtful smile. He admitted quietly to Lily's father one day, "I feel her spirit lingers, content that her friend found his path." Some called it superstition, but the caretaker saw it as faith in the goodness that can bloom even in a harsh world. Corwin's faction, previously determined to drive out the wolf, softened in the aftermath. While Corwin himself remained uneasy about the risk that wild beasts posed, even he couldn't deny the stirrings of respect for Silas' capacity to grieve and let go. His group no longer protested or demanded lethal measures. Instead, they turned their focus to more practical town concerns, shrugging off the wolf saga as a lesson in caution they hoped never to revisit. Gideon, the self-proclaimed expert, vanished from local gossip, last seen driving out of town in a huff after the sanctuary staff took care of Silver. He left little impact beyond a cautionary tale of how opportunists might exploit sensational stories for personal gain. Dana Klein's final report to her agency described both the complexities and the compassion at play. She recommended stricter guidelines for dealing with unique human-wildlife bonds, emphasizing that each case needed empathy, not just protocol. Her office, surprised by the nuance, took her suggestions under advisement, hinting that the incident might shape future wildlife management policies. Meanwhile, Ms. Hawkins, the journalist whose pen had chronicled Silver's journey from start to finish, completed her final piece, Where a Wolf Mourned, How Love Bridged the Wilderness and a Village. Published online and in a regional magazine, the story resonated far beyond local borders, capturing readers' imaginations with its quiet yet heartfelt portrayal of devotion. Emails poured in from around the country, some from teachers wanting to share the story with students, others from animal behaviorists intrigued by Sela's loyalty, and many from ordinary folks expressing gratitude for a reminder that compassion could flourish in unexpected places. Ms. Hawkins wrote a follow-up detailing how the sanctuary regularly sent updates, including photos of Silver adapting to his new pack. In the final paragraph, she penned a hopeful note. Sometimes a broken heart becomes the seedbed of transformation, for wolf and human alike. Lily's father, relieved to see his daughter more at peace, found that the ordeal had stirred something in him too. He took to walking near the forest's edge after work, enjoying the hush of pine needles underfoot and the distant echoes of wildlife. In quiet moments, he recalled Agatha's gentle determination and the unwavering loyalty she had nurtured in a wolf pup. Though sorrow tinged these memories, a sense of pride also blossomed. He and his neighbors had risen to the challenge, protecting a life that was neither tame nor purely wild, but deserving of empathy all the same. In time, Dr. Stone reported that Sela had fully regained his physical strength. The once frostbitten leg no longer hindered his movements, though a faint scar remained as a testament to his history. The sanctuary staff occasionally teased that Silver acted as a guardian to newer rescues, greeting anxious animals with a calmness reminiscent of the caretaker he once knew. Whether the wolf truly remembered Agatha or simply carried forward the lessons of love she'd bestowed, no one could say for certain. But the effect was unmistakable. Silver, once ensnared by hopeless grief, had found a way to thrive again. On a sunlit spring afternoon, Lily and her father undertook a journey to visit Silver at the sanctuary, a trip Ms. Hawkins joined to document. The staff welcomed them warmly, guiding them through the winding enclosures with careful supervision. Lily approached the fence. There, standing amid gently swaying grasses, was Silver. He paused upon seeing her, ears flicking, nose quivering as if recalling a distant yet cherished scent. Then, in a moment that brought tears to Lily's eyes, the wolf ambled forward, pressing his muzzle against the chain link with a soft huff of recognition. Lily's breath caught, unsure if he truly remembered. Yet, as she quietly spoke his name, Sila responded with a gentle rumble in his throat, a small, tender sign that forged a bridge between their worlds once again. Standing under the bright sky, Lily felt a peace unlike any she'd known before. Sometimes love and gratitude could eclipse even the most grievous losses. She whispered a silent thank you to Agatha, whose spirit seemed to linger like a warm presence in the breeze. Stepping back from the fence, she and her father let the wolf return to his newfound pack, satisfied that he had discovered a home, safe, cared for, and free from the snare of relentless sorrow. And in doing so, they too found a quiet resolution, carrying forward a story that would remind them of a truth transcending fences, species, and even death. That devotion can bloom in the unlikeliest corners, weaving miracles from heartbreak. If Silver's tale and Agatha's unbreakable bond with a once orphaned wolf touched your heart, we invite you to join us in celebrating the power of compassion. Subscribe to our channel for more uplifting stories, bridging the gap between humans and animals. Like this video to support our mission and share it so others can witness what genuine devotion can accomplish. Leave a comment telling us your thoughts on Agatha's legacy and how one small act of kindness can echo across an entire community. Together, we can keep forging connections that defy obstacles and nurture hope, even in the most desolate landscapes of fear or sorrow.